Hi, I'm Yoram, and today I want to show you how you can survive a power outage of 10 hours while delivering a virtual webinar or a virtual presentation. If you're from Texas like I am, and probably other places in the US, you know that power outages happen. There are, as a speaker, the three things that you worry about are: number one, that you're going to lose power; number two, that you're going to lose the internet; number three, that you're going to forget what you were talking about. Can't help you with number three. Number two, I recorded a video on what to do to make sure that you have consistent internet and you don't lose your internet. If you go up to the right to the corner, you will see a link to the video on that. But what I'm going to talk about today is how do you sustain a power outage? How can you deliver a long presentation, and in this case even a 10-hour presentation, without power? I built a device. I really assembled it from parts that exist, and I'm going to show you exactly what I assembled. And this device yesterday held my entire office with 3 screens, microphone, lights, camera, and all the internet modems for 10 hours. After 10 hours, I just stopped it and recharged the batteries. I'm going to show you what I built, how I built it. I'm going to give you links to how you can build it yourself. I recorded this video for you based on what currently exists and what I know right now. But things change. New technology, new products, new software versions, new ideas that I get, some of them from viewers like you. So if you want to be informed when I release new videos with new or updated content, subscribe to this channel and get notified when I release them. Oh, and you can also like this video, but that's a whole different thing. The first question you have to ask yourself is, what is it that I need to power? Now, you're going to think about, I'm going to buy a UPS, but I'm going to show you how to know if you have the right UPS. And for the most part, you're not going to find a UPS that's going to keep you long enough. So the first question is, what is it that I need to power during a power outage? So in my case, I need the laptop. I have 2 extra screens. I like to have 3 displays when I present. I have to have the camera, and the camera is powered by its own separate, it's a DSLR, it's powered by its own separate power adapter. I have a microphone, the microphone is powered. I have 2 lights, and all of those need to be powered, as well as my internet modems. The numbers I'm going to look for are the amount of watts that they charge, so that they take. Each one of them on a power adapter plugs into 110 volts AC, and it would tell you, typically it's printed on them, how much power do they consume. Now, if you are not sure, I bought another device, and that device is a monitor. And this monitor has, and you can see it now, this monitor has, you can plug it into the 110 volt AC, and you can plug your other device into it, and it will tell you exactly how many watts does it consume. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to add all of this up to see how many watts do you need. Now, one of the biggest consumers of power are the lights, unless you use LED lights. For people who are using any other kind of light, typical light would take a lot of power. You know, you have the 60 watt lights and 90 watts and so on. LED lights, to generate the same amount of lights, take a lot less than that. So I looked at everything that I had to power, I added it all up, and it added to just about 200 to 220 watt. So this is the first number that you need to find out: how many watts do I need? And if possible, or if you're not sure, really measure it and see how much do they all consume. Have this number, this is the amount, this is how many watts you need to be able to sustain during a power outage. You probably heard that the device that can keep you running when you have a power outage is called a UPS. UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply. It's a device like this. I actually have one of these. This is I call it the short-term protection. And the reason I call it short-term protection is because it's not going to hold your equipment for a very long period of time. Now, one thing that's a little confusing is when you look at the rating of that device, and you can see that the device that I bought here has 900 watts. I just told you that all I need is 200 watts. So why is a 900 watt device not enough, UPS not enough? Well, it's enough to carry the equipment, but the question is, how long will it carry it for? I should also state that a UPS is really made of three main components. First of all, there is a battery, and the battery is really where power is stored. The second part is a charger. A charger takes your 110 volts and turns it into direct current and charges this battery. Then the third part is what's called an inverter. An inverter takes the 12 volt battery or whatever battery I have inside and turns it into 110 volts that come outside to power your equipment. Those are the three things. I want to focus on the battery. This is an example of the battery that goes into a UPS. The battery here, I want you to notice those numbers. It's a 12 volt battery with 9 ampere hour. It is a 12 volt battery that can give 9 amps, that's the current, 12 volts is the voltage, 9 amps is the current, for 1 hour. Multiply the number of volts by the number of amps and you get the number of watts. I'm not going to teach you electronics or electricity here, but this is very basic. So 12 times 9 is 108. You have 108 watts that this battery can deliver for 1 full hour. The problem is that my equipment is about 200 watts, and with 200 watts, I'm not going to get a full hour out of this battery, which is in the core of the UPS. I'll probably get about 30 minutes. I'll probably even get about 20 minutes. And if you're a speaker delivering a virtual event, 20 minutes is probably not enough. So this battery is not enough, which also means that the UPS in which this battery resides is not enough. So let's do the math on what kind of battery do I need in the core of my UPS that I'm really building myself. So if I need 250 watts over a period of 8 hours, that means that I need a total of 2,000 watt hours. I multiplied the 250 watts times 8 hours, I get 2,000 watt hours. This is what I need. The UPS that gives me 108 watt hours, not even near enough. It's 1/20th of what I need. So I need 2,000 watt hours. I'm going to choose whether I'm going to use a 12 volt battery or a 24 volt battery. And typically batteries are 6 volts, 12 volts, 24 volts. You're not going to find 24 volt battery, but you can use two 12 volt batteries and put them in series. Putting them in series means that you get the red or the plus from one battery, the minus of that battery goes to the plus of the second battery, and then the minus from the second battery gives you 24 volts. So I decided to choose 24 volts. I'm going to explain a little later why 24 volts. 2,000 watts divided by 24 volts gives me about 83 amps. 83 amp hours, because we're starting with 2,000 watt hour, and we're dividing it by 24 volts. That means that we need 83 amp hours. Obviously, it's not the 9 amp hour battery that a typical UPS has. So I started looking for batteries that would have at least 83 amp hours. And these are the batteries that I found. Now, this can be very misleading because this looks just like the small battery that you saw in the UPS before, the 9 ampere hour battery. You can see here that this is a 100 ampere hour battery. And I'm starting to get the sense of what the 10 hour or 20 hour that you saw in the other battery. The capacity does depend on how long you're going to use it, or what is the current that you're going to use. So what they're telling me here is that you're going to get 100 ampere hour if you consume it over 10 hours, which means you're going to consume 10 amps. So here's my 12 volt, 100 ampere hour. Remember, I need 24 volts at about 83, let's say 100 just for efficiency and spare and a cushion. So I need two of these batteries. You can see here the batteries cost $165. So I spent $330 getting two of these batteries. As I said, it's a little misleading. You think that the battery is pretty small or the same size. This battery weighs, if I remember correctly, about 57 pounds each. They're pretty big. They're the size of a car battery. Just to give you a sense, car batteries typically have about 60, 70, 80 ampere hour. This one has 12 volts, 100 ampere hour. There are different types of batteries. The type that I chose is called AGM, Deep Cycle AGM. I'm going to give you a link to the exact battery that I used. I did promise to explain why I decided to use 24 instead of 12. In essence, I could use these two batteries in two different ways. One is put them in parallel, so black to black, minus to minus, red to red, plus to plus, and therefore get 12 volts at 200 amps or ampere hours. Or I could put them in series, which is 12 volts, 100 amps, plus 12 volts, 100 ampere hours. You get a total of 24 volts, 100 ampere hours. In both cases, you get pretty much the same 2400 watt hour. The difference is that the less you want to ramp up the power with the inverter, which will be the next part I'll talk about, the next you need to ramp it up, the more efficient it is. And another reason is because in order to get the same amount of wattage, the same amount of power from a lower voltage, I'm going to need a higher current. And a higher current requires thicker wires, and there are going to be losses on the wires. So I prefer to have 24 volts, 100 ampere hour, rather than 12 volt, 200 ampere hour, which in essence gives me the same amount of watt hour. This takes me to the next part, and the next part is the inverter. Inverter is a device just like this one, and the inverter takes 12 volts or 24 volts, and note that the one that I bought here is a 24 volt inverter. If you're going to buy a 24 volt inverter, use a 24 volt battery. If you have a 12 volt battery and you want to use it as 12 volt, get a 12 volt inverter. And what it does is it takes this 24 volts, in my case, of direct current straight from the battery, and it brings it to 120 volt AC. This is a 2000 watt one. Remember, all I need is really just 200, maybe 250 watts at any time. So I could have chosen a smaller one. I like to keep a very strong margin because the smaller the inverter is, the harder it is for it to deliver the same amount of power. So if I would take, let's say, a 300 watt inverter, it's probably going to get pretty hot. It's going to be pretty cheap, but it's going to get pretty hot, and it's going to be less reliable and possibly even less efficient. But when I took a 2000 watt, I can tell you that it was as cool as a cucumber when I was done running it for 10 hours, really consuming just about 200 watts from it. So I chose this one. Wasn't very expensive. You can see that it was actually $225 with a $25 coupon, and I think there was another or another 15. I don't remember, but I got it pretty much for $200. So what this does is it takes the 12 volts on the back. So if I show you the back of this device, this is the back. 12 volts, or in my case, 24 volts out of the battery. And in the front, I can just plug 110 or 120 volts. Another thing that I want you to notice is this indication that's called a pure sine wave. There are different power inverters, especially cheaper ones, that don't create an exact pure sine wave. They create something that looks more like a square wave. It's kind of a variation on a square wave. They are cheaper, however, they can create noise, and some of this noise might even be audible noise that comes through the power supplies of the different components that I have here in my computer setting. So to avoid that, I got one that's called the pure sine wave, and that creates a signal that looks exactly like the signal that comes out of the wall, the 110 or 120 volts that come out of the wall. The next thing that I looked for in this is obviously I wanted to make sure that I had enough power. I wanted 250 watts, 2000, plenty of power. Probably could do with it 1000. I chose the 2000. The price difference was not that big for me to say, let's not get 2000. The next is I want to make sure that I'm taking the right amount, the right voltage, DC voltage for battery. And the last thing is I just looked at the ratings, and I actually read the reviews to make sure this is a device that I'm going to have to rely on. I want to make sure that this is a good device. The next component I chose was a charger. And again, when you choose a charger, you need to charge those batteries. You want to make sure that you have a charger that is capable of charging the battery that you have. So this is an automatic charger that can select between 12 and 24 volts. And so I set it for 24 volts. There is a button here, the mode button. And if you press the mode button, you can get it to the 24 volts AGM, which is the type of battery that I had. So it's the two batteries. And once you set it there, it is going to just charge it with a current. And that's another important thing. It says that it's going to charge it with 15 amps. Well, it's not exactly 15 amps. If you go down, you're going to find that if it charges at 24 volts, it would only charge with 7.5 amps. So this is a lower charging current, and it is good enough for this battery. What it did was when I emptied that battery or these batteries yesterday after 10 hours of operation, it took about 13 hours for this charger to charge them. Now, could I get a charger that's faster? Yes, the batteries can hold a charging current of up to 30 amps. If I went to the battery specifications, it would tell you that I can charge these batteries with up to 30 amps. So why not use 30 amps? The higher the charging current, the shorter the life of the battery is. I'm not in any rush. I had the 13 and a half hours to spend in charging them. And one important thing about this charger is not just a charger, but it's also a maintainer, which means that right now, as we speak, it is still connected to the batteries. It is plugged into the wall, and it is trickle charging, keeping the batteries charged and happy. This is the device I bought, not too crazy of a price, under $200, $177. Next thing that was important was the wires that I was going to use. So really, I only need one extra wire. I already had the two wires that came from the inverter into the batteries. I already had the wires that came from the charger into the batteries, so that was easy. The thing is, since I had two batteries and I needed to connect them, so the minus from one battery needed to go to the plus of the other battery to take two 12-volt batteries and turn them into 24-volt batteries, I needed a wire there. The wires can come with different widths or thicknesses, and 1 foot was enough for me. It's called AWG, and the AWG or gauge is the thickness of the wire, and the current that you're going to use with it really dictates what is the AWG or the gauge of the wire. I went with a 1/0 or AWG 0. This, frankly, is capable of running hundreds of amps. As I did the math, I really needed to not pass a lot more than 10, 15 amps at the time. And because of that, I probably took a wire that was too thick. If I had to do that again, especially when I looked at the battery, the wires that went from the inverter into the batteries, I believe they use something like 4 gauge or 4 AWG, maybe even 2, possibly even 6. There was one more component that I mentioned that I bought, and that was an electricity usage monitor. And really, I bought it just to be able to sense how much current do I really use at any point in time. And so what I really did was I just plugged the UPS that I already have. I plugged it into it. I plugged this into the wall, and I just looked at how many watts is the UPS that I currently have dragging from the wall, and this is what I needed to supply. This is how I knew that I'm actually in reality taking just about 202 watts. Next was putting it all together, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. So essentially, this is the whole device. I'm going to take you and show you the batteries. You can see the batteries are in the bottom. As I said, they're 50-something pounds a piece. This is the thick wire that connects them. The charger is up here. This is the inverter. I think I may have a picture of the back. And what I did was I just plugged all of my equipment into this meter, this monitor, just to see what it looks like. It was running, and when it was running, I think this is towards the, well, not towards the end, but not too far from the end of our test yesterday. You can see this is running. We're putting out 190 watts, so very close to 200. It's pure sine wave. And it puts out 120 volts, 60 hertz. The batteries were down to 24.4 volts. You can see that at the beginning they were actually higher than 26. They settled down at 25.2 volts, and the battery voltage stayed at 25.2 volts for quite a long time. This is again what the system looks like. You can see the charger on the top left. This might be a slightly better view. This is what it looked like at the end of the experiment last night. You can see that the battery voltage is now down to 23.6 volts, which is still plenty above the absolute voltage where the batteries go bad. I believe that these batteries go bad below 10 volts per battery, which would put this at 20 volts. So after 10 hours, this is after 10 hours, the total consumption was 1.62 kilowatt hour. This is, remember that I planned this to be able to support 2500 or 2.5 kilowatt hour, 2500 watt hour. As it turns out, after 10 hours, I only consume 1.62. Yesterday, the entire day, for 10 hours, my entire system that I use to deliver my workshops was taking power through this cable. Last night, right after the test was done, I started charging it, and you can see that right now the LEDs that are lighting on the charger, this one says 24 volts AGM, this one says 25%, so the battery is not even 25% charged. And it starts charging and charging and charging until it got to be charged 100%, and I took the time. It was 13.5 hours to charge it from using it for 10 hours, consuming 1.65 something kilowatt hour for 10 hours, over 10 hours. This is it. This is the system that I built. I'm going to put the links to all the devices that I actually purchased from Amazon. I've put it together. Very happy. I had my entire setup working yesterday for 10 hours, including the internet modems, both of them, the load balancing modem, 3 screens, including the laptop itself, the camera, the microphone, the LED lighting, everything that I needed, even the printer, everything that I needed to be able to deliver a workshop. If this video was helpful to you, subscribe to my channel and get notified when I release more videos like this. Also, check out my resources for speakers at thediyspeaker.com.